on, guys? Welcome back to the page. This is Coach Sean with the SPI System and Framework. We are back after a meet. Week one has been concluded. We're not going to talk about week one. It was just a reintroductory phase to our momentum block, getting us ready to hopefully get into another meet prep for Southeast Regionals. But now we're in week two. We've already completed our primary squat day. I'll drop some of the videos after this, and then we'll do a squat analysis of our primary squat day and then our primary bench day that's attached to that. And then we'll take a look at our deadlift and do a deadlift analysis for our primary deadlift day. Stay tuned. So for our top set, which was 484, I believe that set moved fairly well within the system. I would give the SC score, the signal cost score, about a 2. Typically for week 2, given that this is a newer framework that I've been working with over, I would say over this maybe 6 months to 8 months. This is the first time me actually starting to amplify the loads that I'm using to really start to read how my body and system, how the structural integrity holds up under these loads. So I would still rate this as a 2. Could have gone a little bit heavier for week 2, yes. But given that it's a week 2, and typically we want to save ourselves for a good enough set and feed of strength for week 4, I think with week 2 at a SC score of 2 sits fairly well. And a SC score of 2 basically means that it was working weight, but it was controlled work. So with that being said, I believe 484 moved well. It moved better than my 456 in week 1. I believe that 456 carried quite a bit of overlaying meet fatigue, because I simply after the meet, I started the day after my week 1 block. So it wasn't the best sole of strength, but nonetheless, the bar path was good. Patterns seemed to be holding up under the added fatigue. And then as I crossed into week 2, the same showed. I actually came out of my stiff sleeves and used my stoic sleeves just to give myself more of a feel of the weight. Not necessarily that I wouldn't feel it with the stiff sleeves, but I wanted to make sure that all my systems were still firing and the structural integrity was still upholding, and it wasn't just relying on the stiff sleeves to move the weight. So with that being said, everything within the system still showed green. Like I said, it was a SC score of a 2, and then my back downs were a pause set of 404 for 4, and then also sets of 7 at 360. Now with my back down sets, for me, typically within this system, I like my back down sets to be challenging but mindless work. For me, it's more of perfecting and stabilizing the load under proper technique rather than amplifying the intensity of the load in order to gauge further stimulus. So for me, within my back down sets, I'm just focused on perfecting the technique, so that way, as my fatigue spikes by the increase in sets, I'm still able to uphold structural integrity, thus creating a transferable skill to the platform. Moving on to bench, we're going to drop in a bench analysis. So for bench, I'm not too worried about how my primary day is going, because my bench typically responds with a higher fatigue cost, specifically right after me doing a primary squat day. My bench usually has a little bit more fatigue on it and doesn't give as good as a response. It doesn't, let me correct it. It does not spike my fatigue after the fact, right? But in the sets and in the moment, I definitely feel a lot more fatigue coming in from my primary squat day into my primary bench, which they happen on the same day. So basically right after each other. With that being said, there's no added cost to it. It doesn't carry over into my other days or even after the workout. But I usually have to gauge this a little smarter. And since I'm only doing singles for my primary day right now, just to kind of get me used to heavier load, because after in my rebuild phase, I did not touch anything upwards of 280 pounds, just to kind of give my muscles, my tendons, my ligaments, joints, the rest that it needed to. So since I didn't touch anything over 280 in the rebuild phase, I figured it'd be a smart system play to allow myself to get used to adapting back to heavier load and kind of teaching my structure to restabilize under heavier load. So that way, when it comes to meet day, I'm confident under those loads and I'm not second guessing myself before I touch the platform. Again, it's a very low cost effective day because I only have, like I said, 3 singles. I went 310, 320, 330, and the mind frame here is just to be able to trust myself under higher intensities. Like I said, structural integrity is a key. Now we're going to run the deadlift analysis. And like I said, the deadlift day, my warm-ups moved fine. I felt a lot of pop and spring within my warm-ups, and I expected that to carry over into my top set, but that was not the case. I think just given the load within my week 2, not saying anything was too heavy, is more so fatigue management, right? For me, I find within my own system that my deadlift responds better when it's separated by a couple days from my primary squat day, because I ask a lot of my body on my primary squat day, because primary squat for me is a bread and butter lift. Deadlift, not so much. My top set was 495. Actually, my last warm-up was 440, and it moved fairly well. No pattern issues, no repositioning issues, none of that. So I figured 495 was green lighted. It was still green lighted. The system still counted it fair. But as far as technique, the technique breakdown came when I was reaching lockout. Off the floor, I was kind of slow, but that was the fatigue that I was feeling from having done the primary squat day. And then the next day after, I had primary deadlift. I now know by looking back on the data that I've had and counted previously that I need to separate and give my time, my system, the structure integrity time to recover and adapt to the changes that primary squat has happened, right? So 495 didn't move as I wanted to towards my lockout. Now, had I added powder on, and I would have been able to bypass the quads, getting stuck on the quads, and it would have been a smooth lockout. I think that was the true issue within the lift. So here going forward, week 3, week 4, I'll be using powder to make sure that loads that light shouldn't get stuck on my quads. And, you know, for those that are out there that deal with that, sometimes that's just the hang up. You know, it's not necessarily that the load is heavy on the day, but obviously I mentioned that the structural fatigue was already there, and it didn't spike fatigue. It didn't cost more for me to fight at the lockout with it. It was just simply something that I needed to note, that it was a technicality rather than I just wasn't strong enough on the day. But now I know that technicality also has a role in, or now I know that the days that I separate my primary deadlift and primary squat also play a role in that technicality, whether it happens or whether it doesn't. So with that being said, I'm pretty happy with where my week 2 deadlift is. I expect week 3 to have quite the increase, and I expect quite an increase for week 4. Like, no real fatigue costs there after the fact. No real structural integrity flaw, just a technicality that I have to be mindful of going into my heavier deadlift sessions, and then making sure that the timing and spacing also is abided by within this framework in order to get the maximum capacity out of my deadlift while still getting the maximum capacity out of my squat. All right, so I appreciate y'all tuning in and watching my recap of my primary days for week 2. I think later on I may add in some of a recap for my secondary, tertiary days. But for right now, I'll try to keep it on the main list just because it gives me the most feedback utilizing my SPI framework, and how that system overlies within my own training program. Again, thanks for watching. I appreciate the love and support going forward.